instructions are given.
تفضلي ميري.
Can you hear me here well? Please just give me some signals on the chat that you can hear me well. Interpretation is enabled.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much for your patience as we set up the final logistical arrangements for the translation and all of that, just for everybody to be following up properly. And if you allow me, I would like to open our webinar today. My name is Jamil Sawalmi. I'm the country director of ActionAid in Palestine. And it's a pleasure and honor to have you with us joining this important webinar today. I would like also to welcome our speakers today, who will be presenting their inputs in the form of presentations or verbal presentations to all of the group. And again, I would like to welcome each and every one of you on behalf of ActionAid Palestine, as well as my colleagues here in the team and global colleagues joining us. Apologies. Please note that we will be also, as I said, joined by esteemed guests at national and international level, providing their valuable insights in the different sessions. I will be introducing them as we go along. Again, just to mention to those who joined us now that translation is available. You can choose the language you would like to interact with the group in through clicking at the globe icon at the bottom of the screen and choose the channel between Arabic and English. And I'm very pleased and honored to be moderating this session. Just a quick note also on the timing for the different inputs. We have tried to distribute the time between our speakers today. So I'll be keeping the time, and I'll give you a signal 1 minute before each time slot is ending. Just for the sake of making use of this opportunity, let's try to commit to the time allocation given to each of the speakers. In the beginning, I would like just to make a short statement here to say that we are deeply saddened and extremely horrified by the recent attack on Rafah, on the refugee camp that happened yesterday night, which exceeded any sort of humanitarian principles and actually left a scar on the face of humanity and the global justice system. We at ActionAid are very concerned for the safety of our people in Gaza, and also just to mention that a few of our colleagues were based in that specific area where the attacks happened, and luckily they have left the location just before the attacks happened. So just to say that, in the context of the current war on Gaza, despite the fact that we are tackling the issue of environment and climate justice, it is really important to, again, reiterate the fact that what is happening is beyond any comprehension and beyond any imagination. And we would like to use every opportunity and every platform to speak on the human suffering in Gaza, and also to call upon everybody and every actor, nationally and globally, to do their utmost to stop this ongoing onslaught. So just wanted to say that we are concerned by the recent attack, and it's definitely leaving a huge impact on all of us. Again, moving to the subject of the webinar, climate justice is a highly politically charged topic, especially in the context of Palestine, as it cannot be definitely separated from the ongoing occupation, 75 years of ongoing occupation that has affected every aspect of the life of the Palestinian people, and climate and environment is not an exception. It has been definitely heavily impacted. The pursuit of climate justice in Palestine is not only about protecting the environment, but also about upholding fundamental human rights and ending and dismantling the occupation enterprise. It's also about recognizing the interconnectedness of environmental and social justice and advocating for a future where all Palestinians can thrive in a sustainable and just environment. We as ActionAid, we believe in climate justice because we believe in human rights. And that's to say we are committed to climate justice as much as we are committed to human rights as well. So climate justice is fundamentally about recognizing the interconnectedness between environmental issues and human rights. And it's also important to note that climate change disproportionately impacts marginalized communities and exacerbate existing inequalities, violating their rights to clean air, water, and safe environment. So upholding climate justice means ensuring that all people, regardless of their background or nationality, have access to a healthy environment and are protected from the adverse effects of climate change. In the context of Palestine, it is also really important to note that occupation, control over resources, and relation to climate change and climate justice is an issue that we need to dismantle, we need to break down and understand in the context of the political situation in Palestine or in the country. So the Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories has significant implications for climate justice, as it exerts control over crucial resources such as land, water, and energy. The exploitation of unequal distribution of resources under occupation contribute to environmental degradation and exacerbate climate vulnerabilities for Palestinians. So addressing climate justice in Palestine requires addressing the root causes of the environmental justice, including the occupation, control over resources, and its impact on Palestinian livelihoods. But this also relates to the coercive political environment where there has been deliberate measures imposed or deliberate policies imposed on the Palestinian territories that are used as a mean to control natural resources, but also to limit access of Palestinians to these natural resources. I would like to welcome you again, and I don't want to be taking much of the time of the esteemed speakers who will be addressing us today, providing their valuable input. So allow me to start with introducing Ms. Teresa Anderson, who is ActionAid International Global Lead on Climate Justice. Teresa is coordinating ActionAid Federation's climate justice campaigns, policy, and program work. She leads ActionAid's engagement at the UN climate negotiations to protect the rights of communities on the front lines of the climate crisis. She's also coordinating Climate Action Network working group on agriculture and has authored numerous ActionAid and civil society reports on climate justice. So without further ado, Teresa, I would like to invite you to provide your insight and presentation, please. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to this important meeting. I'm deeply honored to be part of this conversation today, and I'm very touched. For Palestinians and for Gazans right now, there is no more important issue than securing peace and safety. We have seen terrible atrocities reported today. Each day there are new horrors. Each day we try to find new words to express the grief, the people of Gaza are suffering. Justice. But there is no question that the priority demand is to call for a ceasefire now for reasons of human rights, because we are human and because we care about other human rights. The only reason needed to call for a ceasefire and an end to arms sales and an end to occupation is because of the moral reasons. That is reason enough. So the climate justice movement stands with Palestine for moral reasons, not for climate reasons. We don't need climate reasons to stand with Palestine. We don't need reasons of emissions or nature or environment. We stand with Palestine for moral reasons and for human rights. And we talk about climate justice because climate change is deeply unjust and unfair. And we talk about climate justice because we care about the impacts of climate change on people and on human rights. And we talk about climate justice because we know that it is vital to put social justice and human rights at the heart of climate action. So the climate justice movement calls for a ceasefire now because we care about human rights. And there can be no climate justice without human rights. And there can be no climate justice while Gaza is under attack. And that is why the climate justice movement stands in solidarity with Gaza. But climate justice does affect Palestine. ActionAid is a federation working in more than 70 countries, mostly in the global south, in countries who are suffering the worst impacts of climate change, but who have done very little to cause the problem. ActionAid calls for climate justice because we want to see the rich polluting countries, the rich polluting corporations, taking responsibility for what they are doing to the planet and what they're doing to its people. We're calling for them to take radical action for a safe future, a greener future for all, and to support people in need, and for the rich countries to provide their fair share of climate finance. So as ActionAid, we work at national level, we work across countries, and we also work in UN climate negotiations to fight for solutions, to fight for frameworks, to fight for policies that help support the people most vulnerable to climate change. So our work on climate justice applies equally in Palestine, but the context of Palestine brings extreme challenges because Palestine is a land on our earth like any other, and it is not by any means exempted from the impacts. Palestine is being affected by the warming of the planet and the changing weather patterns. Temperatures and heat waves are on the increase, as you well know. Rainfall patterns are being affected. Palestinians are seeing increasing dry spells, increasing droughts. Also extreme cold snaps, devastating harvests and food security and farmers' livelihoods. And sea levels are also being eroded on the coastline. And all of this is projected to get worse in the years to come, with crops affected, olives affected, farmers' livelihoods and their future at risk. So as the world continues to burn fossil fuels and expand harmful industrial agriculture, climate change is continuing to accelerate around the world, and Palestine is disproportionately affected. But unlike any other country on earth facing climate impacts, Palestine is living under occupation by Israel. And this occupation is preventing people from accessing the water that they need to survive, and which is already becoming more scarce due to climate change. This occupation is preventing people from accessing the land they need to grow food and earn a living. This occupation is preventing people from even digging the earth they need to work on as farmers. So this occupation is preventing people from having progressive climate policies, the regulations, the support, the finance to transition away from fossil fuels and industrial agriculture towards real climate solutions that can provide food, energy, health, and human rights for generations to come. We will hear from others today about climate change in Palestine and how this is aggravated by occupation. And we will also hear what this current war and munitions mean for the land and for the people of Palestine, as well as for the greenhouse gas emissions that are harming the whole world. But I am deeply moved by the courage of our colleagues in Palestine, who are brave and visionary enough to ask what the future looks like beyond this war, because they are fighting for justice now and for the future that they will be living in Palestine, which is a land in many ways like any other land on our planet, and in many ways different. So addressing climate justice for Palestinians requires an end to war. It requires an end to occupation, and it requires finding ways to address the long-term legacies of this war, and then learning from other countries on the front lines of this climate crisis to adapt to climate impacts and to transition to greener pathways in energy, agriculture, transport, and other systems. And this will require climate finance and support from the rest of the world. So as the rest of the world, we must all continue to stand in solidarity with Palestine, now in the face of this terrible war, and in the future as a nation preparing itself against all odds to deal with the challenge of climate change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Teresa. And thank you also for reiterating the principled approach of ActionAid to climate justice in Palestine, which is not an isolated issue that relates to the wider political context in the country, and also reiterates the commitment of also tackling the climate justice issue as it relates to the occupation and the impact of the occupation on the climate justice in Palestine. Thank you very much, and thank you also for highlighting the policy work that needs to be done at the global level, which also will recognize the impact of this coercive environment and the occupation on the situation of climate justice in Palestine in general. Thank you very much for your valuable insight. Dear guests, allow me to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Bahjat Al-Jabbareen. Mr. Bahjat is the Director of Monitoring and Inspection Department at the Environmental Quality Authority. He is Chairman of the Committee for the Assessment of War Damage in Gaza Strip, and also a member of several national committees representing the Environmental Quality Authority and the UNEP Nitrogen Action Group International Contact Point as well. Mr. Jabbareen will explain to us a paper on assessing the damage of the war on the Palestinian environment. Mr. Bahjat, we are very keen to hear your valuable input. There will be a presentation, so make sure to follow on the slides Mr. Jabbareen will be sharing with us. Thank you very much, Mr. Bahjat. The floor is yours.
مساء الخير للجميع وشكرا لكم لجميع.
Good evening all. Thank you very much, and thank you for being here in this important webinar. I'm Bahjat Jabbareen. I'm the inspection director at and since the beginning of this aggression. It's not a war, it's an aggression, and it's a comprehensive war on all Palestinian basic components. And in order to evaluate the repercussions of these atrocities, it would take a lot. So, and that's that Gaza is undergoing. Okay, so if we were to clarify what had happened in the Gaza Strip during this time until today, there are three sets of numbers. First, the area for Gaza, it's 378,000 dunums, or 327 square kilometers since 2007, since the political division. Palestinians were banned to enter to the third of this area, which is annexed to the segregation wall, are agricultural areas. This area is so Palestinian farmers were banned to enter this area since 2007, as I mentioned, and it's appropriated by 120,000 dunums, or 1/3 of the Gaza Strip area. And since the beginning of this war, this area has become a war zone due to its constant bombardment, whether with fire belts or with with a heavy equipment that they're using. The other set of equipment that we need to learn about the agricultural areas in the Gaza Strip, whether that are where they have greenhouses or that are planted. These that were destroyed, they're about 120,000 to 130,000 dunums that were completely destroyed. So they also form 1/3 of the whole area, and the other third of the Gaza Strip.
الثلث الآخر هي عبارة عن المنطقة المبنية والمسكونة ومنطقة
Its
الخدمات
area
الساحل
that is inhabited.
وتقدر بثلث مساحة غزة
It's
تم
the coastal
تدمير
area and
70% منها
the shore.
تم
It's up
تدمير
to
70%
and so 70% of this area was completely destroyed.
احنا حصرنا الأضرار من خلال عدة محاور 8 محاور رئيسية محور المياه.
So now we did our statistics here regarding was so about water, about 75 to 80% of the components of the or infrastructure of water were destroyed, whether networks, facilities, and pumping facilities, filling the tanks, canals for sewage and others. So these were completely destroyed or even partial. So the Gaza Strip has in Gaza 40 wells were completely destroyed and about 350,000 meters of water potable water networks were destroyed. Also 93 wells that our resources to Gaza were destroyed. We talk about water in Gaza. The resources of Gaza, about 95% of these are polluted. And before the war, they were polluted due to, as an implication for the previous wars and due to the cut of electricity and not functioning then that the salination facilities are inactive. So now the percentage is like 3 liters per person in Gaza. Also, water is polluted by waste or the sewage is sometimes combined or pumped in agricultural areas in Gaza Valley and in the shore. As for water, for the sea area and the coast, are about 40 kilometers from that area were shoveled. This is the so they're completely shoveled. There's also on daily basis about 130,000 cubic meters are pumped in this wastewater in that area. These are treated by the different facilities when they operate. So this is a complete pollution, not only for the coast, but for the whole coastal area, in addition to the other types of solid wastes that are there in the coastal area and which would lead to that the water life is vanishing to more away, like 5 kilometers from the seashore. As for waste, solid waste, now in Gaza, there's more than 7,000 to 300,000 accumulation of wastewater because they're not being treated, they're accumulated, and so 6 facilities for waste treatment were destroyed. Also for medical waste facilities were destroyed. Around 180 vehicles and pumpers and tanks were destroyed. There's about 130,000 homes were completely destroyed. In addition, 270,000 houses are partially destroyed, which also leads to having debris that is now being mixed with mines, with other substances that are hazardous. 130 industrial facilities that have been destroyed, and these could be difficult, and these could be these they were destroyed. 271 health centers and the public sectors centers were destroyed, and 70% of schools and universities were completely destroyed. So all these demolitions would create waste. As for hazardous waste, there are tens of tons of medical residues that are accumulated in hospitals or outside hospitals. They're not being treated, and these form big risk on people's lives, in addition to thousands of tons of chemical waste and other residues that are due to using maybe the different types of bombs or the white phosphorus bombs. So there's more than 6 to 70,000 tons of explosives over Gaza. They were thrown on Gaza, which forms like in magnitude more than 3 atomic bombs, and some of them have not exploded yet. So, but the implications on people, on soil, on others are very, very could be cross continental. And these implications, whether the emissions or the wastewater, so whether it's chemical or gas pollution or solid waste or liquid pollution, could be cross-continental and could make it to Egyptian borders and Egyptian shores, and even can infiltrate into other residential areas. As for lands, and as we mentioned, there's around 156,000 dunums that are agricultural areas that were completely demolished or partially demolished. About 120,000 dunums were also targeted, completely destroyed, and about 30,000 dunums were destroyed partially. And then this makes 65% to 70% of lands in the Gaza Strip. So these were completely destroyed. This is in general as land, regardless of their use. More than 55% of trees were cut or were destroyed in the streets, in public areas, and in addition. So all these implications and their impact on the viable life and the species that would be affected and won't be reproductive. So this is it regarding lands. As for sanitation, well, there are 9 facilities for sanitation in the Gaza Strip. They were all bombarded, and a part of them were anyway inactive or non-operational before the war, and some of them were completely destroyed or partially destroyed. More than 130,000 meters of the sewage network were completely destroyed, and there are pumps and the stations for sewage, with 70% of these were completely destroyed, and 93 vehicles and equipment were destroyed that are used in waste or addressing waste, treating waste. As for epidemics and the spread of diseases and what's their implications on health, and there are up till this day more than 36,000 martyrs have died. There are more than 15,000 missing. They could be, it could be more than this. There's the internal migration for 1,700,000 Palestinians. This is a recurrent coercive displacement. And also there's the spread of diseases and especially respiratory diseases. More than 180,000 cases were registered in health facilities. The diarrhea and or skin diseases have also spread because of the non-availability of the hygiene issue. So there is also meningitis and other types of diseases due to this. And the other is the pollution of water and radiation. So and the bombardment of Gaza and the implications of using these bombs and the substances that are banned internationally, especially uranium. Uranium could be like the white phosphorus, and in some cases they used the white phosphor and uranium. 60 to 70,000 tons of explosives were used. So this would have years of implications after the war, and it would need tens of years to recover. So this had to do affected all sectors, agricultural sector and industrial sector. So now we have there's the we're talking about demolition of homes. There's about 60,000 cubic meters are from that would result in carbon dioxide and so on, in addition to the dust and emissions of all types that are also cross-continental. And in Gaza, there's about 10, 12, or 14,000 clean energy generator. And as you know, Gaza doesn't have water or electricity previously, like it was scarce. So the approach was to start with renewable energy, but any facility was destroyed completely in terms of newer clean energy, and 60%, they form 60% of energy in Gaza. So, and with this, so these are what we in the Environment Authority have worked on. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bahjat. It's really eye-opening what you have presented. I think it's really important. These assessment and statistics play an important role in advocating around the horrible situation that is unfolding in Gaza. But it's also useful for many organizations to inform their decision making in the future in terms of their priorities when it comes to the environment and environmental justice. I would like to note that the regional aspect of this destruction is very important. I think it's an eye-opening factor, what you have highlighted in terms of the impact of this crisis at the regional level as well. And just also referencing a recent Al Jazeera report that was aired yesterday on the use of plastic as fuel currently for cooking and for heating water, which was shocking. Seeing people who are resorting to burn plastic in order to be able to fulfill their cooking requirements and water heating, which is really shocking at this point. Thank you very much, Mr. Bahjat. This is really appreciated. Allow me also please to introduce our next speaker, Ms. Najla Abdel-Latif, who is an environmental activist representing Zero Waste Palestine Initiative, which is an initiative dedicated to promote sustainable and low waste practices for individuals in Palestine and the Arab region as well. It is serving the idea of encouraging and empowering individuals to take the lead in moving towards a more sustainable lifestyle through interesting, inspiring, and understandable content. Ms. Abdul Latif will talk to us about the environment and the Palestinian narrative, the importance of shedding light on the environmental issue. Ms. Najla, it's a pleasure. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Jamil, and hi everyone. My name is Najla Abdul Latif, and I am the creator of an initiative called Zero Waste Palestine. So I'm going to talk about environmental justice, what it is, and its relation to Palestine. So it's quite clear that Palestine is a typical environmental justice issue, or rather injustice issue. And what is environmental justice? It's the idea that everyone, regardless of race, income, or where they live, have the same right to access a clean, healthy, and safe environment. It's about making sure that no one is left behind and unfairly burdened by pollution and environmental hazards. So the core of environmental justice, what it means is that everyone has the right to be free from ecological destruction. And Jamil, as you mentioned previously, like environmental justice cannot be separated from social and political justice and human rights. So if there is a lack and absence of human rights, then of course there cannot be any form of justice. And justice in all its forms cannot be reached without the liberation of people from occupation and from colonialism. And this is how it's interconnected. So everything is interconnected when it comes to the environment. So we cannot achieve environmental justice anywhere without the liberation of not just Palestinians, but everyone from systems of oppression. There's 17 principles of environmental justice. There's a list that has listed principles that are advocated for when it comes to environmental justice. Some of these principles, some examples are like the right for participation, fair treatment, transparency, accountability, equity, and the list goes on. And in the case of Palestine, every single principle in this list is violated. So of course, there cannot be any form of justice, or especially environmental justice, when Palestinians do not have the right to of any of these principles. And I can also connect it to this idea of environmental, prioritizing the environment. Usually it's quite known that the environment is not a priority for most Palestinians for obvious reasons. And this is, the reason for why that is because first they are lacking the ability to perform these or have these principles of environmental justice in order to reach environmental justice. But also it's an oppression, a brutal occupation that is forming so many challenges for Palestinians. So for obvious reasons, that is why environmental topics become deprioritized in Palestine. So a way to kill people without directly killing them physically is by targeting their resources, targeting food, and the environment that is necessary to their livelihoods and well-being. So Palestinians are victims of serious and systematic environmental injustice that is a result of colonial destruction and settler extraction, whether it being the illegal dumping of hazardous waste, resource exploitation, natural destruction through colonial settler actions, discriminatory water policies and water apartheid. There are movement restrictions, bombings and house demolitions, destructions of land and agriculture. So these resources, these natural resources, are systematically targeted, and these resources are needed in order to maintain a basic livelihood for Palestinians. So here I'd like to also connect it to the idea of connection to the land. Palestinians are known to have a very deep and rooted connection to their land. It's very much part of our heritage and traditions. So that is usually something that I've been hearing since growing up, during my growing up, that we're always, have this deep connection to our land. And this deep connection to the land is a threat to the colonizer. So the colonizer, first, they do not understand this deep connection to their land, to a land, but it's definitely a threat to them, to their existence. So that's why they're doing everything they can in order to break this connection, to weaken this connection, and to disconnect Palestinians from their land. For example, the occupation is systematically trying to disconnect Palestinians from their land by putting movement restrictions, for example, like not allowing Palestinians to access their land, their source of livelihoods, their trees, the land that is necessary for agriculture and farming and so on. Criminalizing foraging is another example. It has been criminalizing the foraging of natural Palestinian wild plants like akub and zatar, which has been existing in our heritage since forever. So this is a form of trying to disconnect us from our land by putting criminalizing this act. Yes, sure. And also movement restrictions, like not allowing Palestinians to access their olive trees, for example, and other forms of land. So I'd like to end with that. The Palestinian environmental crisis is not a separate crisis. It's a crisis of inequality, injustice, oppression, racism, and settled colonialism. And real environmental justice, I repeat, cannot be achieved without real social and political justice. And we cannot achieve any form of environmental justice anywhere without the liberation of Palestinian people from systematic oppression, and without their liberation, and also without the liberation of everyone from systems of repression worldwide. Thank you for your time.
Najla, thank you very much for your input. I think there were a few points that we have picked up in terms of how do we actually shift the narrative, or how do we actually advocate for the narrative that we want. And notably, I've taken note of the colonial narrative and the practices that they conduct to control. Which actually links us to the effective military control of Palestine that manifests itself in so many obvious ways, but we oftentimes cannot see the hidden impact of this effective military control, which extends to climate and climate justice and the environment. You have given us a lot of important points to take in. Thank you very much, and I really commend your initiative, which is a local-led initiative, Zero Waste Palestine. I invite everybody to also check that initiative out, and please continue the good work. Thank you very much for your input, Najla. So I think we're running behind time, and I would like to ask all of our participants and guests today to just bear with us, as we probably will run over time for about 10 to 15 minutes. We'll try to catch up as much as possible, but I think what we are discussing is very valuable, and I would like to also give our speakers the time they need to get their message across. Our next speaker, we're very honored and glad that Dr. Majid Hamada will be addressing us from our local partner, Man Development Center in Gaza. Mr. Hamada is the water and environment specialist at Man Development Center, and he will be talking to us about the change and the negative effects of the Gaza war, with a particular focus on solid waste accumulation and its impact on the climate, but also as well as the impact of climate change on public health, and in light of the overpopulation currently in the different temporary shelters in Gaza. And also Mr. Hamada will be also addressing the issue of weapons used in this war and their effects on the climate in general. Without further ado, Mr. Hamada, the floor is yours.
طبعا في البداية أنا حابب أشكر
I
مؤسسة
would like
الأكشن
to
إيد على
thank
الموضوع
ActionAid
المهم هذا
for this very important webinar
والمفيد والهام.
and
أنا بحدثكم وأنا
and
موجود
significant
في
one.
مدينة
I'm
رفح.
now in
أنا
Rafah.
نزحت من غزة
I've
على مدينة
moved
رفح
from
على
Gaza
أساس
to
إنه
Rafah
يبقى هو ملجأ آمن.
as
وللأسف ما
it
في أي
was
مكان
claimed it's
آمن
a
في
safe
قطاع
place,
غزة.
but of
ما
course,
في أي
unfortunately,
مكان
there's no
ممكن
safe place in Gaza.
شعبنا في
Nowhere
غزة
can be called
إنه يقول
as
إنه هذا
safe in
مكان آمن،
Gaza,
وبالذات إنه يعني
and
ما
especially
مجزرة
that
الأمن
after
تستبعد تقريبا
yesterday's
نص كيلو
massacre,
متر مربع.
it's
الحمد لله
about
رب
half a
العالمين.
mile away from me, but thank God I'm still alive.
طبعا أنا حأحكي عن موضوع
I
الحرب
will
على غزة تتسبب
address
في
that
كارثة
the
إنسانية
implications
وبيئية
of
غير
war on
مسبوقة.
Gaza, that
Next.
it's leading to an unprecedented
طبعا
catastrophe.
لم يكتفي الاحتلال الإسرائيلي بقتل
Occupation
أكثر
did
من
not was not enough for it to
40,000
kill
شخص،
more than
إلا
40,000
إنه
people.
يعني أمعن
It
في
also
موضوع القتل
meant to
وموضوع
kill
الحرب
intentionally
على
and to
البيئة.
increase the level of war even on in the
الخط مش واضح
environment.
كويس أستاذ جمال، ممكن توصل تكبر لي إياه أو ممكن أفتح من عندي.
استاذ ماجد، مش انا اللي بتحكم في البرزنتيشن، يا ريت بس تحكي لنا بالضبط شو المطلوب.
اوكي طبعا
تمام.
في البدايه
Okay,
انا
so
اقول لكم انه يعني انا
I
شويه
would
عندي
like
النت
to,
انستيبل لانه
but I have an
تعرفوا انتم ظروف غزه.
unstable
انا هحكي في
network here,
4
as you know,
محاور
how we're going
رئيسيه.
in Gaza. So
اللي
I'm
هي
going to
انه
tackle four
الحرب
main
خلفت كميات
dimensions.
هائله من
First, that
الغازات
war
المسببه
has
للاحتباس الحراري.
left
وبعدين هحكي عن
residues of
اسرائيل استخدمت اسلحه محرمه
big
دوليا.
amounts of
وهحكي على
gas,
موضوع ثاني
and
شويه تدمير
of
الاراضي
course,
الزراعيه
and then
والبساتين. واخر
Israel
حاجه
is
هحكي فيها
using
موضوع
banned
نفايات الصلابه
weapons,
القاتل
also
الصلب.
the destroy of agricultural
طبعا زي
areas,
ما احنا
and
عارفين
gardens,
الحرب
and
في
even
غزة
forests, and
خلت
for using
كثير
solid
من الغازات المسببة
waste
للاحتباس
that
الحراري
is
في
not being
دراسة
treated. And
أمريكية
as we know, there's
وبريطانية
this new study. It's an American
كانت في الأشهر
English
الأولى
study
للحرب.
that was
وهذه
conducted
أوضحت
at the
الدراسة
beginning of the
إنه
war. This study has
الحرب
showed
أثر
that
خلفت
the war has
مواد
led
مسببة
to
للاحتباس الحراري في
kept
أكثر من 20
many
دولة معرضة للخطر. يعني خلال
residues,
شهرين هدول
and that
نتج عن
in
الحرب
2
على غزة
months,
أكثر من 20
due
دولة
to the war
معرضة
on Gaza,
لخطر
more
التغير
than
المناخي.
20
في
countries are
دراسة
now
ثانية
subject to
إنه
climate
في
change.
أول شهرين أو أول 60 يوم من الحرب
So,
نتيجة
and more than
الحرب
this is
نتيجة الحرب على
leading
غزة
to the
إنه
greenhouse effect
مجموع
or global warming. So,
ثاني أكسيد
and that
الكربون
this
يعادل
war has
ما لا
studied that
يقل عن
it is
150 ألف طن من
carbon
الفحم.
dioxide
وهذه
has
كميات
means that
كبيرة.
there are
وزي ما احنا
lots of
شايفين في
tons
الصور
that,
هاي
as we see in this picture,
شدة الدمار الهائل
that
اللي
big
سببته
destruction
الحرب، شدة
that was
الدست
caused by this war,
الغبار
and the
اللي
big
سببته
volumes
الحرب.
of dust
أكثر من
of
60%
this
من
war, more than
البنايات
60%
السكنية
of
في قطاع غزة دمرت
buildings
بشكل
in
كامل أو
Gaza, residential
بشكل
buildings in
جزئي.
Gaza were partially or completely
نسبة
destroyed. The
تصاعد ثاني
percentage
أكسيد
of
الكربون
the
ثاني أكسيد
carbon
الكربون
dioxide
كان يعادل
emission or
حوالي 60
monodioxide
مليون طن
was equivalent
متري.
to 60 million
إسرائيل استخدمت
tons Israel has
في
used
حربها على غزة
in its
معظم
war
الأسلحة
against
المحرمة
Gaza,
دوليا.
most
استخدمت
allowed
كافة أنواع
weapons,
الأسلحة.
and it used more
استخدمت
all
طائرات،
types of
استخدمت
weapons,
مدافع، دبابات، استخدمت
and
بوارج بحرية،
tanks,
استخدمت معظم الأسلحة
all types of like these are intentionally prohibited weapons. It used the uranium and white phosphor. The white phosphor that was banned by the 1993 resolution, which is it's one of the most dangerous banned weapons or prohibited weapons. So Israel has used extensively in its bombing civilians, and especially when it used to enter any area and wanted to evacuate the people, they would use this intensively. They would throw white phosphorus and uranium. And as we see in the next slide, Israel in its war against Gaza has used all types of weapons, equipment. 365 kilometers, the area of Gaza, it was subject to these bombardments by F-16, by all types of tanks, all by drones, and bombs that weigh more than 2 tons. All these weapons, all these factors have impacted the greenhouse effect, the change in the climate, and the emissions of the carbon dioxide, and have affected majorly the displacement of people. Now, in the other dimension, Israel is, and due to the area in agricultural area in Gaza is about 170 square kilometers, which is like 65 square miles. It's about 47% of the total areas of Gaza. So Israel has destroyed more than 50%, so meaning 35% of the whole agricultural area was completely destroyed in the first 2 months, in the last 2 months actually. And between October 7th and 21st of March, 48% of the green areas were destroyed by the Israeli soldiers. And it wasn't only by the Israeli soldiers or military, but there are also those displaced were cutting wood to cook or to warm up and so on.
أستاذ ماجد على ما يبدو فقدنا الاتصال.
Seemingly we lost Majid.
Mr. Majid.
Seems we lost Mr. Majid.
Okay, apologies everyone. I think you all appreciate the fact that Mr. Majid is joining us from Gaza. So this is very, very much expected that we lost him, unfortunately. I suggest we just give him 15 to 20 seconds to see if he can join. Otherwise, we will move to the next speaker. So I think my colleagues in the office here are trying to get in touch with him. Once we get a confirmation from him, we will continue with our program. Okay. Thanks, Wissam. So my colleagues just informed me that we cannot get in touch with Mr. Majid. Please, whoever is controlling the presentation, if you thank you very much. I think what Mr. Majid has been trying to present is very important. Just looking at the scale and the variety of weaponry that was used in Gaza is absolutely shocking. It feels like every arms and weapon manufacturer has actually tested their weapons in that very small piece of land. So it's really shocking to see that level of destruction done with that type of arms. Allow me also, please, to introduce our next speaker. Ms. Abir Botme is the coordinator of the Network of Environmental Organizations, an organization that organizes environmental lobbying and advocacy campaigns closely with affected communities, the youth sector in particular, and local bodies to influence national policies and work to contribute to addressing the environmental problems faced by the Palestinian people. Ms. Abir will be talking about the environmental effects of war on Gaza, the long-term and the short-term ones, which I think will be very beneficial for us to listen to Ms. Abir. Please, the floor is yours.
شكرا ومساء الخير. بالحقيقة أنا
Thank you very much. Thank you. Actually, I met Mr. Mashad in 2015 in a project in Gaza. We used to do impact assessment about the 2014 war on Gaza. And regretfully, the recurrent aggressions on the Gaza Strip and the implications because there were this war was exacerbated for so long. So this war is the most vicious on Gaza and all areas in Gaza.
بخصوص الآثار المباشرة
As for the direct impact
الآثار المباشرة
on
short term
direct or short-term impact on the climate.
واضحة العرض صحيح؟
نعم تفضلي ست عبير.
بخصوص الشورت تيرم
This is the short-term impact and the direct short-term for this war on Gaza. So as for rubbles and wastes and debris that are mixed with bodies and dead bodies that and also mixed with minerals from the weapons that were bombarded on Gaza. So the assessment up till now, it's 37 million tons of rubble are the results or in Gaza, and that it's about 80% of these buildings in the different governorates in the Gaza Strip. This is a big amount of rubble. It forms a big problem, and it should be managed really in the coming years, and how to treat these amounts of rubbles. There are many proposals how to get rid of them and how to maybe bury them on the shores of Gaza, but this will have negative impacts on the sea life because they're too many, they're too big, and they are comprised with big amounts of minerals. And so at the beginning of first 60 days of the war, it was about 25,000 tons of explosives were bombarded, were shelled over Gaza, and Gaza is a small area to be able to endure these big amounts of explosives. So this will have a very big negative impact on the sea life. In addition to another important point, it's the environment situation was catastrophic anyway due to the blockade on Gaza, and which and due to the Israeli procedures and the control of Israel over resources in Gaza, which had led to the pollution of internal water in Gaza. And so focus was mainly on sanitation and that these don't can't handle the heavy metals to be cleaned. So that's why Palestinians and Gazans will have it in their waters. So so rubbles or burying the rubbles will and in the sea will create another problem. And as I said, and the impact on the life, sea life and fishery in Gaza. This because there's a big dependency for fishermen in Gaza on this source. Also about the details of the daily life in Gaza. Big number of victims, martyrs, and wounded. The big number of wounded in hospitals in the Gaza Strip. We know about them, but there are some details in the daily life that we don't know. It's about the pollution of that we have in shelters. The big amounts of waste that are in the shelters, outside the shelters, that cannot be treated, that cannot be, we cannot get rid of them, and for many reasons. First of all, there's no fuel, there's shortage of fuel, and if municipalities in all governorates are trying to manage these amounts of waste, but the shortage in fuel prohibits or at least impedes the getting rid of this wastewater, this waste, solid waste. Also, if they were to be burned, this led to the spread of diseases among the displaced, especially in shelters. And as we know most people in the Gaza Strip are now mostly they're displaced for more than 10 times. More families have been continuously moving around, but till now there's no one safe place in Gaza. At the beginning, Israel has announced that Tel Sultan will be the safest, and Israeli announcements claimed that, and asked the Gazans in the north to move to Tel Sultan, where there's water and food, and but it was also targeted yesterday, and they burnt the tents in that area. So there's no safe place in the Gaza Strip, and most people, most Gazans have a minimum. They've moved 6 times since the beginning of the war. So the accumulation of waste, there's no separation between medical waste and or domestic waste. So there is a mixture between medical waste and they because they target hospitals, so they're working within this. They try to get rid of such waste, but it's not separated, and it's all together mixed, the medical ones and waste, the solid waste, which forms a big hazard on Palestinians' health and even on the soil and geographical areas and internal areas. As for sewage and what we see, the daily floods. So the infrastructure is in general, as we see, at least 100,000 cubic meters of sewage and wastewater are being dumped daily onto land or into the Mediterranean Sea. And as we see, this has led to 100 this wastewater. This is on daily basis in the streets, and as we see here, there's direct contact by Palestinians to this wastewater, and of course the spread of disease, insects due to this pollution.
التلوث بسبب المياه العادمة المنتشرة
that's everywhere,
كذلك أثرها على
and its
الأراضي
impact
الزراعية
on
وأيضا على مصادر
agricultural lands
المياه
and on
وتجميع
resources,
المياه
water resources,
وتحديدا في منطقة مواصي
especially
خان يونس
in
وهي
Mawasi Khan
تربة
Yunis area, which
رملية
is
أغلبها وهي
it's
سريعة الامتصاص
mostly
وبالتالي
sandy
فيضان المجاري
type of
والمياه
soil, so
العذبة
it has a big
يسبب تدمير وتلوث
or a big
مجريات
absorption
المياه
capacity, and which will destroy the
تجميع المياه
accumulation
أثرها على
water to
الأراضي
pools.
الزراعية
And the
تحديدا
impact on, of course,
زملائي
agricultural lands.
الكثير عن
My colleagues
تدمير
have
الأراضي
mentioned the
الزراعية
destruction
ولكن
of
حسب
agricultural
الإحصائيات
areas, but
تقريبا
according to statistics, we see
26.6
that
من البيوديفرسيتي
26.6%
تم
of
تدميرها
the
في
greenhouses
قطاع
have been
غزة وتحديدا
significantly
تركز في
damaged,
المناطق
and mostly
الشمالية
in the
كانت
north
هي
of Gaza.
الأسوأ في
These
هذا
were the worst
التدمير
affected.
تقريبا
There's about
42.6% من المحاصيل
42.6%
الزراعية
of
تم
all
تدميرها
croplands in
في قطاع
Gaza
غزة
were
وأيضا
completely
كان
damaged
المنطقة
in Gaza,
الشمالية
and also the northern part of
والشرقية
Gaza
هي
and the
الأكثر
eastern part
تضررا
were the
من
most
هذه
affected
التدمير
and damaged
الإسرائيلي
by
من
Israel.
بداية الحرب
And
خلال
since the
الست
beginning of
شهور
the war,
الأولى
for the past the
كان
first 6 months of the war,
20 تم
uh,
قطع وحرق أكثر من
there was
20 ألف
more than
شجرة
20,000 trees were
من
cut
المحاصيل المثمرة
uh,
والأشجار
from
المثمرة
like
وهي نقطة
fruit
بتبين
trees, and this
وتوضح
tree uh,
الأضرار
clear
اللي
clarifies
حدثت نتيجة
the
عفوا
possible
200,000 شجرة
proportional damage to
و19,000
cropland in
شجرة
the Gaza
تم
Strip.
تدميرهم
So
بخلال ست
these
شهور
were
الأولى
just
بالإضافة إلى تدمير
damage
الكثير
in the
من
first 6 months, in addition
الآبار
to other damages
والمنشآت
like
الزراعية
wells
في أغلب
and
المناطق
agricultural
الخطة
facilities
بتوضح
in other
تركيز
areas. And so this
التدمير في
part shows
المحاصيل
where
الزراعية
the
وأيضا
focus of
المنشآت
damage
الزراعية
had happened
ضمن
in
مناطق قطاع
agricultural
غزة
facilities in Gaza.
بالإضافة إلى
In
الانبعاثات
addition, to
الناتجة
the emissions,
عن
the huge amounts of
استخدام
emissions that were
المتفجرات
recorded that using
الممنوعة دوليا
the
خلال
prohibited,
الشهرين
internationally prohibited
الأولى من
weapons during
الحرب
the first 2 months
كانت
of the
حجم
war.
الانبعاثات
Uh,
اللي تم
so
تسجيلها
the amount of
تساوي أو
emissions
تتعدى
that was
20
recorded
ألف
exceeded
20
about 20
من انبعاثات الدول الأعداء
of
في العالم
the
يعني
highest
الأصناف
country
الكربونية زي
of
الحرب
the countries with
خلال
highest
الشهرين
emissions in the
الأوائل
world.
كان
So
انبعاثات
the first
البصمة
2 months, the
الكربونية كانت أعلى
emissions
من
and
البصمة الكربونية السنوية
carbon footprint
20 دولة
was
من أعلى
higher than
الانبعاثات
20, the
هاي حسب
20 countries
دراسات
of
السوشيال ساينس
with highest
ريسيرش
emissions,
نتورك
and this is by the
ووضحت
highest
زميلنا
research
ماجد عن استخدام
social science
الفوسفور
research
الأبيض
network. And as
واللي
mentioned,
هو محرك
there was the use of white
دوليا وبيكون
phosphorus, which is
له أثر
internationally
طويل
prohibited,
المدى
and that has long-term
على
impact
كل مكونات
on the
التربة
all
وكل
components
مكونات
of
البيئة
good soil and environment.
بالإضافة إلى
In
تدمير
addition,
كل
the
المكونات
destroy of
الطبيعية
all
النظام
natural
الحيوي في قطاع
resources, the
غزة
viable
التنوع الحيوي
components in
تم
Gaza,
استهداف محمية وادي غزة
variations,
بالعديد من
and the valley of
المتفجرات وتدمير
Gaza was
المحمية
destroyed by
بشكل
many of
مباشر وهي أيضا
these.
كانت
So it's
تعاني من قبل الحرب
which
من
where
تدمير
they were
بسبب
suffering
الحصار
even
على
before the war
قطاع
due to the
غزة
blockade.
بالنسبة لقطاع
As
المياه
for water sector,
من الأيام الأولى للحرب
since the
على
beginnings of the
القطاع
war,
تم قطع المياه من
uh,
الآبار
water
والخطة الرئيسية اللي كانت
was
تزود
cut
قطاع
short, which
غزة
was from
تم قطاع
wells that would,
الغذاء
so there
وأصبح
would be
الملجأ
no
الوحيد
water available,
الغذائي هو
and
الآبار
for
الموجودة في
Gazans,
داخل قطاع
their
غزة
only hope to get water
والمياه
is from the
المالحة
internal wells
حسب
or
الإحصائيات
salty
الاستهلاك
water. And
الفردي في
according
قطاع
to statistics, the consumption per capita for potable water is 1 to 3 liter per person, although WHO standard it's 100 liter per capita daily. But in case there was another potable source of water available, people would, of course, use it. But most people use salty water to wash, to dry, and even to drink at times during war.
بالإضافة إلى تدمير الكثير
In
من
addition
المشاريع
to the demolition or destroying many of the solar energy facilities. As we know, Gaza had undergone 17 years of blockade and siege. So, that was the only hope for energy, whether for hospitals or on a domestic level, or municipalities or agricultural facilities. So more than 60% of these projects for solar energy facilities and so on were destroyed in all areas in Gaza, and this has led to the halt of all desalination facilities and others. What's happening in Gaza is a genocide. It's an environmental genocide as well. And whether it's there are the direct reasons, like displaced people are living the worst situation and circumstances due to direct pollution, and then they also depend on vegetables and plants.
حتى الآن لا يوجد
And up till now, there is no analysis of the heavy minerals that are in those fruits and vegetables that they're getting from the farms in Gaza, although these farms were also bombed and shelled, and accordingly heavy metals have made it to such vegetables. Environmental companies are doing the analysis for the pollutants that are resulting from this war, and then now we're trying to get samples from soils to analyze the soil and to measure the heavy metals in them. And we're taking the air samples from leaves of trees and targeting the biggest number of heavy metals that have resided on in those areas. And now we're using the different laboratories in hospitals to analyze some types of fruits that people consume to know about the implications of these on health. As for environmental repercussions, so all viable signs in Gaza have been destroyed, and it's not only about 50,000 or 80,000 wounded within this aggression on Gaza, but they're targeting the whole population in Gaza. They're cutting all resources of water, energy, destroying hospitals, and allowing the people of Gaza to live under such circumstances. This very dire situation and unacceptable health and environmental circumstances. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this valuable insight, Abir. It was really important to also understand, the short-term and the longer-term impact of this crisis, and it was really important to learn also that there are different aspects in terms of the impact. There are ones that we can directly see and ones that are necessarily invisible to us currently. Just a quick note on the timing. So I think we will kindly ask you to stay with us 12 more minutes. We'll try to wrap up and close by 4:30. So I will split the time between Mr. Abbas Milham and Mr. Asad Rahman. If you can kindly cooperate with us in terms of the time. I understand it's a very critical issue that we need to give it enough time to explain and to also put context to to what we explain. So if you kindly have 6 minutes each, and I will use 2 minutes to wrap up, I will be very much, that will be very much appreciated. Mr. Abbas Milhem, thank you very much. It's an honor to have you with us. Mr. Abbas is the executive director of the Palestinian Farmers Union, which defends the farmer interest and upholds their rights, improving the possible environment for the growth and development of the agricultural sector in Palestine, and also developing the agricultural policies that respond to the needs and the priorities of the farmers in Palestine. I give you the floor, Mr. Milhem. So please.
مساء الخير الجميع بداية. وطبعا
Good evening to you all. And thank you, ActionAid, for organizing this important webinar and giving me the chance to discuss or to present one of the main issues, which is the impact of this crazy war and the genocide on the agricultural sector and farmers in Gaza, and of course to raise the voice of Palestinian farmers. But since I don't have time, let's quickly just talk about the general context. So we've spent life in these webinars just to talk about the impacts of the genocide, the destruction, the systematic destruction by Israel. And we've written a lot about describing the repercussions. Every sentence that was mentioned today needs lots of research and to show the big impact now in Gaza. That was a complete destruction war. It's against people, it's against stones, it's against trees, it's against anything that's viable or inviable. So they wanted Gaza to be non-viable, and since we've seen these presentations from the colleagues, we see that to reconstruct Gaza or bring Gaza back to life might call for a miracle, but we hope that we will stay strong in order to do whatever we can to do in order to get Gaza back to life. Well, just let's note something very important. What's happening in Gaza, there are two wars and not one war. The genocide, as we know about it in Gaza, which was now discussed in the previous presentations, and about a big destruction, but also another type of war is happening in the West Bank. It's led by the settlers under the protection of the Israeli soldiers and under the cover and protection of the right-wing government of Israel. So for the first time in the Israel governments, two ministers are settlers, Ben Gvir, who is known for the internal security in Israel, and he's responsible for covering and providing security to settlers to attack farmers in Israel, and Smotrich, the Minister of Finance, who finances these attacks and these gangs and this and all these settlers. So this is another war that is happening now in the West Bank that we need really to take care of. Settlers since day one, since the start started on October 7th, the plans went out of the drawers as if these were set already previously, but they started the implementation since the first hours of the war, where settlers were got their guidance from the government and implemented whatever they were able to do, and to seize all lands. And they were also enforcing the law instead of that the government does this. So settlers became the upper hand, and Palestinians were only documenting these attacks, and day by day, and we see that the number of attacks in the West Bank against farmers have gone up from 3 attacks per day to 11. And I'm talking about against farmers only. I'm not talking about other civil facilities or other communities. The first objective of this is that this annexation plan would be implemented completely to exploit all Palestinian lands and to evacuate it from Palestinian people in order to displace them. So they started these attacks viciously in 3 patterns. It's the direct attacks on farmers in their lands, as happened in Bilal Saleh, who was killed cold-bloodedly by settlers during the harvest of the olive season. And as happened with farmers in Aqraba area who were killed during their work in their lands. This is how to, another way how to terrorize them and how to lead them into evacuating their lands. 3, the third type of attacks, which is now well seen, is to ban farmers from accessing their lands. So for instance, during the olive season, it is the most widely spread in Palestine. So more than 100,000 families depend wholly or partially on this season. 50% of these lands were not accessed by their owners, and olives were not harvested because they were banned from accessing their land. And this has led to a $60 million loss just from the olive harvest. And they were also, regarding the animal stock in areas like Masafer Yatta and areas like Area C for the dairy products and so on. They were banned from going to these areas, about 80% since October 7th till now. So this has started, this had obliged them to feed their livestock only once a day and not 3 times a day as used to happen, which of course affects their products retroactively. And another type of attacks, it's the displacement of Palestinians by the threatening them with weapons. It has led to displacing 1,500 families from their communities, whether in Masafer Yatta, south of Hebron, or in Ras Al Auja area. It's west of Ramallah, between Taiba area and Jericho, or from the Palestinian Jordan Valley. So they were coercively displaced, and their lands were taken forcibly by settlers. All these types of attacks, they just serve the main purpose of evacuating Palestinian land from Palestinian people. So we will be surprised if we don't find any land with a settler on it, whether a shepherd or any type of settlers. There are families who cannot now access their lands, as I said, and this is one of the hot issues or hottest issues in the attacks of settlers. And there's an area called Kufar Ra'i. 36,000 dunums are planted by olive trees and almond trees. Half of this area are areas A and B, and still yet farmers since 2 months cannot access their lands, and they could not pick their olives, and now they cannot prepare for the next season of olives, and this is the basic income for such areas. So it's very difficult. It's very serious. I know that ActionAid works on an international level on advocacy and so on. So this is a very important issue. We need to raise awareness about all these issues. We all know that the world knows about Palestinians. We know that the whole world knows about Gaza. Now Gaza, they aimed at isolating Gaza. Gaza is now present in every house around the world. Everybody raising Palestinian flag. But now what needs to be done? This is the time that we need to start actions, not only use words.
Without holding this occupation accountable against all the crimes, genocide crimes, without holding.
So we need to hold settlers and others against their crimes. They will never be stopped. It's not by words. We need to stop we need to have actions to stop them, to boycott these settlements and settlers. And this is really most extremist government in the history of Israel. And this requires lots of lobbying from all solidarity movements around the world to pressure their governments to take positions, to put sanctions on Israel so that they pay the price in return for their crimes, as they did with other countries. Why Israel is not, why don't they implement the same sanctions that they've implemented on Russia, for instance, regarding the Ukrainian war? Aren't we humans? And so these double standard measures need to change, and Israel needs to be held accountable. They're above the law. They're treating life above the law. They feel that they have strong impunity. So it's time to boycott the actions and boycott this whole entity in order to stop them. I try to commit to time, although I have lots to say, but I know that we're short of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Milham. These are all legitimate questions. What we can promise is that ActionAid remains committed to its advocacy and lobbying efforts towards all the Palestine issues, which includes climate justice and environment as well. I will comment on your input, but I will give the floor directly to Mr. Asad Rahman, who is the director of the London-based War on Want, who also works on both climate justice and Palestine issues in general. Mr. Rahman will be talking us about humanitarian aid, the ceasefire and arms sale as well, and international law and impunity. Mr. Rahman, it's a pleasure to have you with us. The floor is yours. I will be commenting on both the recent interventions with my closing remarks. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jamil, and thank you to ActionAid for the invitation. And like everyone else, it's with a very heavy heart that we meet again, seeing the images of yet another massacre in Rafah, and of course, one more horror to join the litany of horrors, not just that we've witnessed over the last 8 months, but of course over the last 76 years since the ongoing Nakba, racism, settler colonialism, occupation and systems of apartheid. And as the climate justice movement and as movements for justice, I think, you know, the words of President Petro of Colombia, you know, echo in our ears when he said at COP 28, you know, what we're seeing in the faces of the Palestinians, all of us in the global south see our past, our present and our future. And of course, this is a litmus test, not just for our governments, but also for our movements. And it's why we always, as a movement, said there is no climate justice without human rights, and there is no climate justice without an end to colonialism. And so this has never, of course, been about, for us, climate justice has never been about emissions. It's always been about understanding the structures of injustice, oppression, etc. And I want to say on behalf of our movements that you, as the Palestinian people, you are not alone and will never be alone. And we, as our movements around the world, we are not just spectators, but we are part of a global movement for justice to hold those responsible accountable. And quite rightly, I think many people will ask, well, where is international law in this, and how can states act with such impunity when so many red lines have been crossed? And of course, the whole body of the rules-based system of international law came out of the bloody ruins and horrors of World War II, and the call never again has unfortunately become again and again, and we've seen that, and we think back to the promise that was made then, that starvation would never be used as a weapon of war, that there would be no deliberate targeting of civilians, of medics, of journalists, of workers, aid workers, etc. We've seen all of those lines being crossed, and not just being crossed, but the bloodiest toll in all modern conflicts. And of course, even when we think about genocide, in 1948, the convention, the General Assembly of the UN, called for a convention on the prevention and punishment of the crime of genocide. And often I think our rules-based system has left the impression that, of course, the rules only apply to certain countries. And whilst in recent years we've seen the genocide and the ethnic cleansing of former Yugoslavia, which ultimately led to International Criminal Court, which, the former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Jose Ayala Lasso, I think very famously said, a person stands a better chance of being tried and judged for the killing of one human being than they would the killing of 100,000 human beings. And of course, many people quite rightly have been hesitant and have said, well, how is it that the Iraq War was never prosecuted, that illegal detention and torture at Guantanamo, the torture sites, how is it that there is a difference between the hypocrisy of the approach in terms of Ukraine and then of what's going on in Palestine? And of course, of the 50 people that have been charged under the Rome Statutes of the International Criminal Court, 47 of them have been African. So there has always been this impression that the rules-based system applies only to certain places and only certain countries. Now, all of us have watched in these last few months, we've seen UN resolutions calling in March for a ceasefire. 2 days ago, a new security resolution denouncing attacks on UN staff and aid workers. We saw the ICC on the 20th of May announce it will be seeking arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister and the Israeli Defense Minister for war crimes and crimes against humanity. We saw the ICJ back in January saying that there is a plausible case of genocide and that Palestinian rights were at real risk of irreparable damage, and call for immediate measures to prevent those acts of genocide, including, of course, the lifting of the illegal blockade on humanitarian aid, including food, water, and medicine and fuel. And of course, just this last week, we've seen the additional measures calling for an immediate halt on an assault on Rafah and the opening of the Rafah crossing for aid, and of course also ensuring access to people. Oh, sorry, I will speak slower. I'm trying to get a lot in. Access to Gaza for the investigators to investigate the crimes of genocide. And those of you who followed Palestine as War on Want, we worked on Palestine for many, many years, will know, of course, we've had an ICJ ruling that the apartheid wall is illegal. The apartheid wall still stands. We know that, of course, that there are also pending cases, whether about the Great March of Return or the illegal settlements, the torture of Palestinians in the illegal detention and military camps. And of course, the response of Israel after the ICJ ruling, I think, was very telling when they said, an Israeli spokesperson said, there is no power on earth that will stop us. And in that same week, we saw the United States senators and officials threaten sanctions against the ICC. We saw the United Kingdom say that the ICC's outcome was unhelpful, saying that the ICJ's ruling was unhelpful. And of course, many of us here in the global north, including ActionAid, War on Want, and 22 of our leading humanitarian and human rights organizations have been campaigning together, calling for an immediate ceasefire, for an arms embargo, support for the ICC, and of course, reinstating the funding to UNRWA. And I think at this moment, we all know that it's not simply having the rules-based system. It's about how can you ensure accountability, and in that, of course, solidarity is the key. And we as citizens of the world hold a very, very fundamental role. And I think it's very telling, for example, that in the US, in the UK, in Netherlands, in Germany, that authorities are willing to turn guns and batons on their own children because students are standing up and saying we no longer want to be complicit with genocide and calling for their academic institutions. So this question now in terms of like what is the role of rules-based system, and I think many of us are saying, well, actually our own governments are willing to burn down the whole rules-based system to give Israel this impunity. And I want to just maybe even focus just very specifically on the UK. So we have very clear guidelines and laws about the risk of arms and military equipment that have been transferred to Israel, and if they're being used to facilitate or commit various violations of international law, and those attacks that amount to war crimes, since we've seen that. And failure to do so is not only a breach of international law, but it's also a breach of the UK's own laws as well. And these are binding obligations. They're not choosing. They're binding obligations in the International Arms Treaty, Arms Trade Treaty. They're binding under the UK's own strategic export licensing criteria. And yet, we've seen since 2015, £474 million worth of military exports to Israel. 15% of the components in the F-35 stealth bomber are made in the UK. And of course, those very same components have been responsible not only for killing the tens of thousands of Palestinians, but including, of course, UK or citizens, including UK aid workers at the World Food Kitchen. And since the outcome of the ICJ and the ICC, we've even seen President Biden announcing $1 billion worth of new arms sales to Israel. And I think this culture of impunity and this sending of impunity and complicity, whilst it looks at this moment, of course, hugely problematic, we need to remind, and I want to remind, and we're reminding our own governments, that Article 3 of the Geneva Convention not only says that the following acts will be punishable, that genocide and conspiracy to commit genocide, and that direct and public incitement to commit genocide and attempt to commit suicide, it's also complicity in genocide. And increasingly now we're seeing in many, many courts and national courts across Europe, movements beginning to bring in legal challenges to our own governments. Here in the UK, we're bringing a legal challenge. In the Netherlands, there's legal challenges to named individuals and officials in our own governments for their potential complicity. And as the ICC said, this is not the end. This is not the end of in terms of the arrest warrant. So I think now our responsibility as a global movement is very, very clear. And if we don't, and I want to just very echo one of the sentiments, we're already seeing, and we've seen for a very, very long time, that Israel then markets those battle-tested weapons and securitization. And we're seeing the boundaries and the frontiers of war, including AI facial recognition, being crossed in Gaza. This is the military's greatest experiment, and of course it's on the bloodied bodies of the Palestinian people. And the narrative that is being used to justify that is being echoed across in the global north, of walls and fences, of Islamophobia, of dehumanization of both Palestinian people and attacks on the Muslim community here. And we're seeing hand in hand this rise of the far right, using much of the same legitimacy and rhetoric. So when we fight on Palestine, we're not simply fighting for Palestine, we're fighting for all of humanity. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Mr. Rahman. It was really important to have that analysis in terms of our international rules-based system and the fact that this system is actually working for certain groups and against certain groups. And that's really discouraging for all humanity. So I think the call for accountability is our key issue here. Just before wrapping up in 1 minute, I would like to thank those of you who have stayed with us despite the fact that we went over time significantly, but also understanding that other people's had to leave due to other commitments. So thank you very much. Just wrapping up quickly here, I would like to quickly summarize a few overarching notions or overarching messaging that I've heard through the different interventions. It was clear that if there has been a statement or a title for this webinar, it would be "No Climate Justice Without Dismantling the Occupation Enterprise or Without Ending Colonialism," which I think very relevant to the context of Palestine, and it also relates to the global struggle for injustice everywhere. It's applicable in different contexts. And I think also part of the practical calls that I've heard through our conversations today is the call for ending arms sale, and also to have a principled approach towards tackling climate justice and environmental issues in Palestine. The third point that I heard also, which was really important, is to recognize the regional impact of this environmental massacre or the ecocide that is happening in Gaza. It's not going to be only contained in Gaza. That's going to have regional and probably wider than that impact on the neighboring countries, which also encourages all of us to call on the regional actors to take their part in terms of holding those perpetrators accountable. So it's not going to be staying within the borders of Gaza. It's going to have also impact on other regional countries. An important also point that I've heard is the focus on shifting the narrative, which means that even oftentimes in these armed conflicts and wars, we often consider the most visible aspects of these wars and atrocities, but it's clear that there are a lot of invisible elements that we also need to focus on in the context of climate justice and environment, but also in other contexts of this war. To Mr. Milham, I think we can sort of summarize your input in terms of an agricultural occupation, which is something that is being used as a means for forcible transfer and eviction of land. So now the occupation is taking a different or is putting a different hat in terms of evicting the land from its owners, depriving them from accessing their land for agriculture, which can be sort of put under the title of agricultural occupation. Just to finish with with a few questions, legitimate questions that were asked. How do we actually restore confidence in the rules-based system globally? And what it takes actually to bring Gaza to life again? This is in your words, Mr. Milham. And what are the sort of the practical actions that we all need to take in order to ensure accountability? Because accountability will be the first step to restore trust in any justice system globally. Just finishing by reiterating ActionAid's commitment to the outcomes of this discussion. We will be summarizing the discussion points and the different presentations that we also got from our guests, and hoping to produce a report where we can summarize a sort of a comprehensive way forward. We will share it with all the participants. I think all of you have provided your emails. It will be really important to continue the conversation. It will be very important for us also to capitalize on the global solidarity that is happening with Palestine. A lot of these solidarity movements around the world are focusing on the political aspect of the conflict. So I think there is room for us also to advocate for environment and climate justice as part of these student movements and the different demonstrations we're seeing at the global level. Thank you very much. We really appreciate your presence. We really appreciate your contributions. And we definitely, this will not be our last interaction on climate justice and environmental in Palestine. Please stay tuned. There will be following actions also organized by ActionAid Palestine and also our federation members. Can't thank you enough. I wish you a pleasant day. Thank you again. Thank you very much.